Good day to all of you, and welcome to PCMA's Critical Thinking Series. In 2021, PCMA recognized that there were challenges and opportunities, and they were coming to us at light speed pace. And we reacted by creating a professional forum that would identify these issues, bring them back to the industry, along with leading experts to kind of discuss how best to see the issues and how best to strategically react. My name is Rick Coyne. I'm the managing director at PCMA and a 50-year plus veteran of strategic planning, membership strategies, and educational programming. I'll be hosting today's panel discussion with two of the industry's true luminaries, people that really don't need introduction as recognized experts. Dr. Jim Butler, CEO of Club Benchmarking, and Henry DeLozier, principal at GGA Partners. What I believe sets these guys apart, far from many of the other folks that we all know in the industry, is that both of these gentlemen rely on data and strategic thinking to create greater opportunities for club leaders to succeed. And I specifically sought these guys out when we were going to talk about today's issue, which is coping with reality. As we all know, the lives of Americans and others around the world have been significantly affected by COVID over the past 3 years. It's created pent-up demand. It's created unprecedented growth in many cases. Along with that growth came, obviously, opportunities, but are there also challenges? Increased costs, shortages, continued inflation, energy costs, labor shortage and cost. All of these issues have created considerable challenges, again, to both club operations, as importantly to the elasticity of a market's willingness to pay a higher level of fees when service may not be up to normal standards. So, Jim, Henry, welcome to Critical Thinking Series, and thank you for sharing your considerable expertise with our audience. If you're ready, let's get started.
Okay.
All righty.
Thank you.
Welcome. All right, here's the first question that I'd like to pose to both of you. Labor issues, rising inflation, energy costs, all of this over the past few years have created significant challenges for private clubs. What are your major concerns as they relate to these costs and their effect on clubs and ultimately even to their members? Yeah. Henry, you want to take that first?
Sure. My greatest concern in the boardroom at most clubs is confusion, loss of focus, and therefore...
oh my God, I can't believe she broomed me again.
Henry?
Yes?
Are you there?
Yes,
okay.
I am.
Okay.
I was saying the thing that worries me in the boardrooms is confusion, loss of focus, and therefore forgetfulness of the mission that has been established through a strategic plan or a game plan on which a board has agreed. And so from that standpoint, I think the combination, the convergence of multiple influences is causing disruption within the boardroom, and I think it will carry through for several years.
We seem to have just lost Jim here. I'm not exactly sure. There he goes. Jim, did you have something to add to that? I apologize that you keep getting bounced out of this.
No, I'm not sure on that too. Yeah, I think that, one of the big concerns I think is on the macroeconomic scale that we look at. I mean, I think when we talk about the money supply and the amount of money that has gone into the market and the impact with the stock market going up, and I think the uncertainty, to Henry's point, there's so much uncertainty in the market that, in my lifetime, we've never seen anything like the last 24 months and that amount of money supply going on. And then our members are so dependent, on the market. So from Club Benchmarking's point of view, we want to make sure that people are planning and looking at the data and really being very careful. And we'll talk a little bit later on the seminar about what some of the impact on that is. But I think it's a great uncertainty. The world doesn't like uncertainty, and there's a lot of it out there, as Henry pointed out.
Yeah. In this same period, we've also seen difficulty in hiring and keeping qualified staff to deliver on the goods and services that, obviously members have come to expect over the decades. With the costs and potentially marginalized services, how should clubs be reacting, and should there be a concern relative to the elasticity of the prices that can be charged to members, especially Jim and Henry, in light of your answers just a second ago?
Yeah, let me take a crack at that, Henry, and then you can jump in. I think, it's counterintuitive to a certain extent, Rick, because we just went through one of the great periods in the clubs. So we know the data shows that initiation fees have gone up. We know that at the typical club that we're over the 50% mark in waiting list situations, and we know that the dues pressure has gone up, so therefore dues are at the highest they've ever been, and yet we sold the most number of memberships that we've ever sold here in the last couple of years in terms of the clubs, especially the clubs with golf. That certainly is not the case in every club, and I'm not representing that, but the data shows that the clubs have done well in COVID, and I think it goes back to value, that with security and the clubs being a safe spot and a great spot to be, that there is some elasticity on the pricing. But again, I'll go back to the first comment, which we think we got to be real careful with, but we think that clubs are based on value, not based on that price. And if the value is right, there is some price elasticity.
Thank you, Jim.
And Rick, I'll pitch in behind Jim's comments on a couple of things. First of all, we've seen an unprecedented growth in demand growth for private club memberships. Who would have ever imagined that a global health crisis would be so generous to private clubs, and golf for that matter? But it has been. And at the same time, what we're starting to see, there are two characteristics that we're starting to observe and that I'll share with this audience. The first is that we're seeing private club boards starting to act like they have an unlimited supply of capital. And that's just misguided thinking. If they're listening to the guys at Club Benchmarking, if they're listening to the guys at GGA Partners, there's a constant drumbeat that says, pay attention to your data, pay attention to the numbers that you have, because they will tell you a tale. And that's not happening. What's happening instead is new capital, as Jim pointed out, is coming into boardrooms, and it's being spent as quickly as it possibly can, with no intention, with no clear-cut game plan, and that's going to come home to bite some clubs. Furthermore, what I feel that we've begun to observe in the last, let's just say 6 months, is starting to see a cooling or a softening of demand for private club memberships. Certainly not cataclysmic, certainly not something to make everyone run and hide in the closet. And at the same time, it's cooling. It has been white hot, that demand, and I believe it's going to hot. And it's important for the people who are participating in this process, be on top of their numbers, be sure that you're managing your leads flow pipeline, and see that you keep feeding more members into your matriculation process for membership. That's going to be a real key, because your boards are counting on that continued inflow of capital.
I think both of those are amazing points. One of the things to the audience that we have had conversations between Henry, Jim, and myself is that, generally speaking, economics are pretty simple. You have life cycles of products and businesses: high growth, slow growth, maturity, decline. In our industry, in the private club industry, we've seen at least 3, perhaps 4 of those cycles over the past 100 years. And one of the things that I think focusing in on, and Jim, one of your comments brought this to my thought process here, was that how do we stay at that while we now have that high growth, and now as Henry maybe described as the maturity or perhaps the decline, how do we stay at that maturity level rather than see the decline as we have seen in the other 3 or 4 that have already taken place in our industry? And Jim, one of your comments was value. And so a follow-up question here might be, which demographic of members will be most affected by all of the things, again, that you've already described? And what can we do to mitigate the issues by age, whether that's programming or value, by age, gender, interest, club amenities, and services? Also, and I think one of the things we may not know in this industry is there a difference between how the tenured members see today's club versus the new member?
That's a mouthful. You want to take that first, Henry? You want me to?
Go ahead, Jim. I was just trying to keep track of the various questions there. But
All right.
I'll follow you and pitch in wherever I can.
I know Henry loves this. I was with Henry in California at a club, and we were talking about the demographics. There's some fascinating stuff going on in the industry right now, Rick. The 2 biggest areas that we see, this is a general statement, but I think it's fairly true in most clubs, are the 2 biggest components are the people that have been at the club for a long time, and I'm going to say over 15 to 20 years, and then the people that have been at the club under 5 years. So if you think about those 2 groups, if they're your 2 biggest groups in the clubs from a demographic standpoint, we know the people that joined the club 20 or 25 years ago want different things than people that have joined the club the last 5 years. And we can get into that later on, but specifically, that's number one. Number two, the people are living longer, and therefore we have more demographics and different demographics in the clubs. We're all familiar with the boomers. We're all familiar with the greatest generation. We're all familiar with Generation X, Generation Z. Well, for the first time in these clubs, we have people that are over 90 paying full golf dues, and we have people under 30 paying full golf dues. So if you've got 40 90-year-olds that have the 1 o'clock tee time, and right behind them, you have 4 25-year-olds that have the 1:10 tee time, I'm here to tell you, you're going to probably have an issue that you're going to have to deal with, because those 2 groups of people experience the golf course differently. Those 25-year-olds, and Henry knows this as a player, they're going to have the music going, the hat's on backwards, the feet are up on the chair, the shirt's not untucked, and they want to be done 2.5 hours, and they're going to hit the ball 300 yards, probably with no idea where it's going. Those 90-year-olds are going to bunt it out there. They're going to talk. They're out there to enjoy their friends, tell stories, swap stories, and they don't have to be done in 2.5 hours. Let's put it that. And that transcends to every part of the experience in the club. So it's a great topic. It's far more challenging for clubs and managers and management to have to deal with just on a value standpoint.
Thank you, Henry.
I'll pitch in and behind that, Rick, and observe that, first of all, one of the things that I consider to be something of a universal truth is that when there are difficulties in private clubs, they most often reveal themselves along the lines of gender and generation. And Jim just talked about some of the generational differences that we're seeing and most of us are living with. And there are also changes in the view that most clubs have with regard to matters of gender. You know, so many clubs were kind of quietly organized so that the men could have their Saturday morning tea times and not be bothered by ladies playing on the course. And we're dealing with new generations of women who do not consider themselves second-class citizens. And in fact, they're going to make it very clear to you that they are not second-class citizens. So gender and generation first. The second thing that I consider to be a universal truth is that members' relationship with their club is emotional. It's personal. And it is not transactional. So, there are very few people joining clubs who are saying, we're going to make so much money off of this membership. Man, did we strike a good deal? Quite to the contrary, this is the place where they intend to have memories, where they intend to share good times, perhaps with family and friends, but it's emotional. And so any misstep, any surprise, any disappointment is personal. And so as operators out there who are thinking about these trends, it's important to remember that the key to your future success, regardless of gender and generation, is make it personal. See that your staff knows everyone's name. See that every member's preferences are remembered. Use the tactics and the tools that are available to make it personal, and you'll continue to have success, and you'll stretch these good times in terms of demand for your club even longer than it may run at other clubs.
Both incredible answers. And one of the things I think that came clear to me in your responses is that not only do we have significant cultural differences within our club, but we now have the added issue of blending those cultures so as not to create even greater issues. And that's, if you thought the question was a handful, the response for these clubs is a plethora of things that have to occur. Thank you, gentlemen. Let me move on to another question. With the sudden growth and prosperity, generally comes the itch to make capital improvements. And I think, Jim, you opened, or Henry, you opened with a lot of the idea that if there's capital there, let's spend it. Obviously betting on the longevity of this sudden growth to sustain debt. One of the things that I think we have talked a little bit about, or if we haven't, we're going to talk about it, is we've seen dues increases occur probably to the tune of around 12%. But we probably have seen prices rise in the 20% range. I think, again, that's betting on the if-come that we're going to maintain these levels of membership long-term, which historically has not been the case. What's your general advice to clubs on the timing, amount, terms of capital spending, debt ratios, and services during this current period?
Let me jump in on the ratios, because I think we study this a lot, and one of the things that we would say as an industry is historically we have not done a great job in capital planning because we don't understand cost associated with replacing our current capital, which we call obligatory capital, and then anything new or growth capital, which we call aspirational capital. And the data that shows that is that we historically have been in an industry where assessments are common. And I think we can all agree that for most clubs, not every club, but most clubs, assessments is a word that people don't like. And as a result, generally speaking, of bad capital planning. As clubs have invested, one of the ratios that we look at is, can clubs cover their capital costs? And the ratio that we look at is we look at their net available capital, which is just very simply how much capital do they have coming in as the numerator, and then divide that by depreciation and interest and debt service. And what we find is that as much as 75% of the clubs in the industry are not covering that as a ratio. So therefore, we know if you don't cover that, we can predict with 100% certainty that there'll be an assessment to come forward. So that's a ratio, that's a data point that we think is really important to look at. The second thing is, once you invest, the other thing that happens is you have to create more capital because that investment is more. And one of the concerns that we have as we look forward is that clubs invest this money, but they don't look far enough forward to try and come up with additional capital sources. we're all old enough. Rick, you referenced the crash, that there's been other downturns in the economy, 2000, 2010. And in both those situations, clubs lost members. Well, it's slightly different now that clubs have waiting lists, but the same thing happens is those initiation fee incomes are going to slow down because there's not as much membership turns or growth membership turns. So that capital is going to have to be generated somewhere else. And there's only one source of capital in the private club, not-for-profit world, and that's the members. Somebody might say, well, it's the bank, but you still have to pay that back. So that's a ratio that we would want everybody to look at. Again, I'll just repeat it. It's how much capital do you have coming in? What's your depreciation? What's your interest? What's your debt service? And can you pay it back?
Great point. And by the way, that's living proof of why doing business with club benchmarking makes good sense. They're on top of their numbers. They pay attention to that. They're a great source. And by the way, they're a generous source at sharing with you the information they have and the things that they're learning. So hats off to Jim and all of his colleagues at Club Benchmarking.
Thank
Rick,
you.
You called out 12 to 14% on dues increases, which really, I'm sorry, I think you called out 14%, but we're seeing that range running in that same category. 11 to 14% is what we have been experiencing, and of course that's after increases of almost 10% year before. So we've seen a very significant increase in expenses and dues attempting to cover those. What we have seen in this time of relatively easy money coming into club boardrooms is board members losing focus and therefore wanting to spend money on pet projects or unplanned projects, and that's going to put their clubs at risk. The clubs that prosper are the ones that take a very business-like approach to planning out their capital reserve needs by way of a capital reserve study, plotting that on a year-by-year basis, so that in so many words that becomes your uses of funds, and then where will the money come from to pay for those uses. And the clubs that do well as far as managing their capital needs are the ones that have planned the sources and uses of funds so that they can be sure that they have funding each year for the coming years, as opposed to what most clubs do is they spend money when they have it, and when they don't have it, they defer the capital maintenance. And if you look at it, this surge of new membership initiation fees has certainly been a catch-up for decades-long deferred capital maintenance, as Jim pointed out. The other thing that I want to emphasize for everyone to just keep on their minds is this difficulty in the boardroom is usually driven by the fact that most people on boards are short-term thinkers. They're on the board for, let's just say, 3 years as a term of office, and they're wanting to do things quickly, right away. And at the same time, the clubs that do well over the long haul have a long-term capital plan. They think beyond the given term of any specific board member, and their capital plan is durable, and it extends well past the term and tenure of any given board that is serving you. So that flaw in most clubs' governance model introduces risk to the capital planning model.
Yeah, and Rick, is it okay? Rick,
Of
can I
course,
make
yeah.
one more point?
Of course, Jim.
Because I think it's really important, just building on Henry's conversation there, is, the income statement in the not-for-profit world is a break even. So we raise the dues to cover the cost of this inflationary period. And at the end of the day, the income statement is going to be a break-even budget for the vast majority of the people on the call. On the capital side, one of the things that we're going to have to get used to, and Henry referenced the capital reserve studies, is with this inflation, going up at 8.5% or whatever it was last month. I'm just going to use 10% to make it easy on math. The typical club has about $26 million of assets. So if that inflationary period per year is 10%, that's $2.6 million on an annual basis the club's going to have to create to be able to replace those assets just in 1 year. And if we compound that year after year after year, it's going to be a really big awakening, we think, in the industry that we're talking about as we go forward, because the capital ledger, we don't have that scorecard in many clubs. They don't have that scorecard, and they're not counting inflation, and capital dues historically have not been increased the way that operational dues do in association with inflation. So that's going to be a really big deal in clubs. I'd be interested in Henry's point of view on that too, and what they're seeing and recommending to people as they go forward.
Same thing, Jim. That deficit that arises, and this, let's just say this board pushes it down the road to the next board, and the next board members come in. They've already got a bunch of enthusiasm for projects that they want to do. They don't want to pick up and carry someone else's burden that's been pushed onto them. And so it becomes a self-perpetuating problem. And clubs that are well managed, that are well led, don't defer capital. They attend to their capital needs, and as a result, they maintain the quality of their assets, and therefore they offer a greater value proposition to members and prospective members.
Wow. Can I have you guys back for one more critical thinking series after this? And let's talk about leadership, because I think, you've identified the universal problem that clubs have had forever and will continue to have forever. It is the nonprofit board that turns over every 3 years and has their pet projects. And it's not a condemnation of board members and their enthusiasm. What it is a condemnation of is the lack of strategic thinking and planning to get yourselves through that. So let me give you a follow-up question, because you're talking about balance sheet items, you're talking about capital spending, you're talking about debt ratios, you're talking about perhaps even overspending. One of the age-old questions that we constantly get in this industry is, where should we spend our capital? It doesn't have to be spent on major projects. Can it be spent on pickleball, which is the fastest growing sport in the country? Can it be spent on social activities that give back to the members something that they desperately want and need? In your opinions and what you're seeing, what are some of the things that are absolute necessities when you're thinking about capital projects?
Boy, Jim, if you want, I'll try this one first.
Please.
And I'll say, in answer to your question, Rick, the things that should be priorities for spending looking forward are the things that matter to women in your club. The future of private clubs is controlled by females, and everyone should be alert to that reality. Women are looking at their clubs as a place where they will have a safe haven for their families and loved ones. So they want a wide range of amenities and services, and they expect them to be at a very high level. So the future of your club is in the hands of the women who are members of it, and that dictates a broad palette of services, facilities, and amenities.
Let me just follow up on that, Henry, and I'm not sure my statistics on this are totally accurate today. I've been using this statistic for a long time, but one of the things that I talk to clubs about is that somewhere in the area of 85% of today's discretionary decisions are being made by the female. And now I get argument after argument after argument about that, because most every man I talk to says that's BS. In my household, it's 100%. So the point here is well taken, that we definitely know that women are making those decisions. But another piece of that is that something in the area of 75% of the nation's wealth is held by women over 50. So if we're not paying attention to that, we're missing something really amazing. Jim, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I think Michael Silverstein wrote a book on that. And in that book, he actually quoted 90% of the money in real estate is based, and they did a study of very successful clubs that are supported by women. There's data, there's actually lots of data that support that. In all the survey work that we do, there's a statistical difference between what women want and what men want also. And I think if you look at the capital investment predominantly that has gone on in clubs, casual dining, resort style, pools, and fitness, to Henry's point, many of that is because of the women and the family as you go forward. And this is a perfect example of how the demographics have changed. And if you want to get the vote passed in a situation where most memberships only have one vote, you need to make sure that you have women on your committee, and you got to make sure that you have women standing up in front of the town hall meeting and talking about that. We have a very cute story where we say everybody should have a Flo, the lady Flo in the audience, to stand up and say, we want that casual dining, we want that resort style pool, we want that fitness, because there's going to be a naysayer in the audience, and predominantly our boards are governed by who? Older men that in many cases don't want those amenities.
Jim, have we lost you?
While we're waiting for Jim to come back online, Rick, I'll just observe or reinforce a data point that he shared with everyone. In her book called Marketing to Women, Martha Barletta, some years ago, called out that 91% of home purchase decisions are made by a female. So that becomes a very critical data point for everyone to keep in mind. Jim referred to Silverstein. I'm referring to Martha Barletta, but the fact of the matter is it is women who control so much of the lifestyle of your club, and to a great extent, the member satisfaction of your club. So let us all pay attention to that.
Totally, Henry. And again, while we're waiting for Jim to come back, I think, one of the things that we all recognize is the old adage of build it and they will come. It's not necessarily so, and it's a figment of that pet project master that is trying to push that exercise. There's no replacement for understanding equivocally what your members want, and that comes generally from the use of surveys. Jim, I know you use them extensively. Henry, I know you use them extensively. What's your experience in today's club relative to the member experience and the needs of members? And we could talk about it demographically if you'd like, about activities, events, instructional programs, organized leagues, all the kinds of things that are programmable rather than capital related. And how important are those things in terms of setting up today's clubs in terms of value?
Jim, I'll let you go first if you want on this one, and I'll follow in behind you.
Okay, I'm going to give you, Rick, a real data answer on that. We track what we call non-golf spend, which is all the money that is spent on everything but golf course. And the data is very clear. The clubs that spend 20% of their fixed expenses on non-golf items have the most members, have the highest initiation fees. The clubs that have the limited breadth of amenities in the 5% zone are the least successful clubs in the industry. So to your point, the data is very clear that a broader breadth of amenities and services for the members make a stronger club.
You bet,
Wow,
Jim.
That's an incredible statistic. Thanks for sharing, Jim.
And Rick, I'll pitch in behind that with the observation that people join a club because they're seeking a platform for socialization. If you wanted to be a hermit, you would not have joined a private club. You're looking for a platform that enables you to meet new friends, enjoy old friends, to socialize, to see and be seen. And so it's important as club leaders, as operators are considering in this discussion, this idea around, so what should be the priority? Anything that gives people the opportunity to interact and make friends. You look at no one of the baby boomer generation was raised on the idea that one of these days you'll get to play pickleball and you have a bunch of new friends. They discovered that. And why is pickleball such a booming activity? It's so social. It's easy to do, and you get a chance to have close interactions with others, and that's a really healthy thing for people as they go on through their lives.
I think one of the things you mentioned there, Henry, and it's very important, whether it's bocce or it's pickleball, it's easy to learn.
Yes.
It's not the investment of time that tennis or golf or any of the other more demanding sports have. And it does give that socialization. One of the and I want to follow, this is just kind of a follow-up of this question. You both have mentioned that understanding what the female wants and needs. How does this same question relate to them? What are the things that they're looking for? What's most important in the minds of women today relative to their needs in that club?
I'll take a swing at it, Jim, if you want. I want to emphasize, I believe the most important thing to women is tangible demonstration that you recognize their right to be in a lead role at the club, and that their role and their contributions are respected. So that's the first thing. Then you get to what is it that they want beyond the recognition that they have a right to be involved. Is the platform that is most social is the one that engages women the most. And frankly, the platform that excludes people the least is the next step. So if that's 300 people playing bridge, then that's great. You get a chance to see everyone, you get a chance to have some treats, and at the end of the day, you spend a very enjoyable and peaceful day with your friends.
With the obvious tangible effect of maintaining that social bond, which then is part of your retention process. Jim?
Yeah, it's a great topic and lots of information and data on that. I mean, when we talk about motivation about people, there's internal motivation and their external motivation. As Henry points out, social is the reason why people join clubs. You dive into it gender-wise, women are joining because of that social activity, and really important. When a lady joins the club, many times it's who am I going to be friends with? Is it easy to get into a group that I can be friends with? From an external standpoint, we know, especially with COVID, it's safety and security. Safety and security in the market, and on almost every survey that we take, we see from a female standpoint that that's really important. And then one that I'll not surprise you guys on, but maybe the audience, in all of the residential communities that we survey, landscape is one of the highest rated items in terms of the importance of that within the amenities. And the first couple times we saw that, I was a little surprised about that in many times it's rated higher than golf, but it is. And if you put that on the female side and just look at it from the female side, it's usually in the top 3 of importance within the club environment.
Thank you. And I think, again, we see that on the surveys we do as well, Jim, that sense of arrival, that sense of belonging, that pride that goes along with all of that. So everything that we're talking about seems to be encapsulated in the same thought process. I want to belong. I want it to be social. I want to be proud of it. I want to be able to bring my friends there. Would you say that's correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and I would say more importantly than that is, we just have had this unbelievable membership experience in the clubs, and yet when we go into clubs, one of the things that I would ask them is, give me the report on why your new members joined. And I'm waiting yet for somebody to give me that report in any detail. Most people have one line on the application that says, I joined because of golf, or I joined because of pickle, or I joined because of tennis, but they don't do a deep enough dive. And to build on what Henry talked about on value, we're the one business that collects all the information, and yet many times we don't collect the most important bit of information, which is why do our new members join the club, and how do we know as a club provider how to provide value for you as a member. And I would challenge everybody that runs an operation to be an expert at that. And if you do, you can create an incredible experience for your members.
I would follow up to that, Jim, and I think that's an excellent point. And, I think we're talking about what members want, but we really haven't delved into, other than the research that both of you do. One of the questions, and this is a bit of a give back to the two of you if you don't use this question on your surveys, but all of the surveys that I've done over the past 15 or so years have two sets of questions. On a scale of 1 to 5, please rate the following in its importance for you joining the XYZ club. And the second question is the same one, the reasons why you stay. And then you may list your amenities. And when you're asking that question and you're able to break it out demographically to see how the woman responded to that, to see how the man responded to that, to see how the age demographic or the family makeup responded to that, all of a sudden, what you really have in those two questions is somewhat of a roadmap of where your club in your marketplace, based on your culture, needs to find itself. And I've always found that one of the most useful tools in my strategic planning of anything else that we do. Let me move on to another issue, and I think this may be our last question, then we'll open it up to the audience. But with attrition trending lower and housing and real estate developments in short supply of homes, initiation fees and transfer fees are probably diminishing. Do you see this as a short or long range issue, and how should clubs be addressing it?
For me, I see it as a short-term issue because, as I said, I see the changes that are happening in the housing market. So many of my old friends and brethren from the housing industry are bringing on new product. We're going to see more clubs being introduced in the next 5 years or so. So I see this as a short-term issue, and I think that it's something that we all have to monitor very carefully.
I think in terms of with initiation fees and turnover decreasing because clubs are full, there's going to be more of a dependence on capital dues. And, capital dues historically in the industry started predominantly at the last downturn. So I was in the Naples-Fort Myers market, during the last downturn when the stock market was 6,000. And at that point, initiation fees were decreased and capital income decreased because people had a lower price in order to attract more members. And that's, in my history, I think that's really when the capital dues came out of the ground, because there was less initiation fees dollars, and yet we needed to create those capital dollars. So with inflation, we think that shift is going to go more and more towards capital, which we believe should go towards obligatory capital, and then use those new member initiation fees towards aspirational capital.
Anything else, Henry, to add to that?
No, I think Jim has spoken to it well. This is a great time. The market is allowing private clubs to correct in many ways past bad habits with regard to capital management and capital reserves. So this is the time to make those fixes and be prepared for the next generation of capital deployment in your club.
Jim, we are at a point here where we are now asking the audience to send along any questions that they may have. One of the questions from Marta, and I'll get the last name wrong, sorry, Marta Castaney. When James says landscaping is important for women, what is he referring to? Grounds landscaping, gardens, architecture, scene reviews, location of the club, etc.
Yeah, in that particular context, it's about the grounds and the way that the grounds and the plants and the landscaping looks, especially to Henry's point, as far as the entryway into that. If you have a club with a golf course, the importance of landscaping out on the golf course and around the clubhouse, the flowers, how they look, how the trees look, are the plants native to your area? Do they fit into your development? Is it seamless in terms of that? So the developers pay particular attention to that. They have landscape architects for that, and that really sells memberships and houses in terms of that. You wouldn't do a new course development or real estate development without a very substantial landscape plan.
And Jim, I'll just pile in behind you again. Marta, great question. And I can tell you in our discussions with our clients that are master developers or home building companies, that landscape entrance that Jim is describing is referred to in their companies as the marketing trail. And that is because they know how critically important it is for people to have that great arrival experience with the insinuation that if they can do this great a job for landscaping, I'm sure they can build me a wonderful home. And
isn't that true? Absolutely. Marta, by the way, responds by saying, mind blown. Good answer, guys. Christine Roberson asks, can you also speak to diversity? It's important to Gen X. Has it hit the private club world yet?
I'll pitch in there and great question. Again, I love that question about diversity. It's a question that people in the private club world are talking about. We're not seeing a lot of movement yet. In many cases, members of clubs who are predominantly white people don't know how to go about recruiting people of color. They don't know how to message that sort of inclusive recruitment. And it's something that people in our business segment need to catch up on pretty darn quickly, because the idea that we're not going to be in a more inclusive society is one that's is past. We will be inclusive, and finding ways to do so successfully will be a key for most private clubs.
Jim?
Yeah, one of the great clubs that have done a good job on that is the Harvard Club. So I'd encourage everybody to jump on the website. They have information available up there. It's certainly something that everybody's going to be paying attention to here in the future, and it obviously is very difficult in terms of doing that in some situations. But it's got to be on your strategic plan. I don't really know of a club that we work with that it does not come up, and that people are trying to do something about it.
One of the, just to add maybe to Christine's question, when we look at diversity and the color issues, the sexuality issues, whatever those issues may be, we do have some precedent. And one of those precedents was the Jewish club, which was predominantly created on the basis that the Jewish population was not allowed into the Gentile club world. And so they evolved into their own set of clubs. By and large, over the years, because of intermarriages and a lot of other inclusiveness of the clubs that had heretofore been not allowing the Jewish population to join, Jewish clubs found themselves into a situation. By the fact that they simply opened the doors to Gentiles, or that a Gentile club suddenly opened their doors to Jewish, did not open the floodgates. So I think maybe one of the questions that is actually being asked here, how do you make that connection?
The how-to part is the portion of my response, and that is, I think many clubs are seeking out alliances with segments of previously unrecruited members. And diversity, we have a tendency to gravitate to diversity in terms of color, but there are matters of diversity, Rick, as you pointed out, with regard to sexual orientation, to lifestyle, to different segments of smaller groups that have been left out of clubs for the most part. And it has to be an intentional process. And my advice to people, if you genuinely want to do this better, is to seek out some people, as Jim pointed out, at Harvard Club and ask, how are you doing this? What have you done to become more diverse? And understanding that you're never finished becoming more diverse.
That's a great answer. Again, one of the things that when you guys are talking about this, what my mind goes back to after 50 years in this industry, we had a hard time even getting a woman on a board, much less a majority of women on boards. I think I would see diversity as one of the big challenges because of the system of governance that we presently have, and perhaps the fears and other things that follow with many of the broadcasts that we hear day in and day out, and the woke generation, et cetera. So I don't see this, in my own personal opinion, as being something that's going to happen overnight. I think it's something that is toes in the water, not butts in the sand, by the way, just toes in the water and going gently until we can figure this out. As one final, I don't see any other questions in the queue here. One other question that I think is germane on a lot of people's minds, and that is, it's about wait lists. And obviously, Jim and Henry, you both pointed out that we're finding the most, somewhere upward of 50% of clubs now having wait lists. They're faced with a variety of issues related to what should capacity be relative to categories of membership. How many should we have? Is compaction a short or long-term issue? How can clubs effectively manage these issues? And how best should a club manage the wait list in terms of allowing utilization while you're on that wait list so you don't lose that person, and or the fees to be charged to them? I thought that was a great question from you, Jim, by the way. Thank you.
Well, I can promise you it didn't come from me. It came from people calling the office. So let me take a first crack at it. And that is, we're telling people, keep your foot on the accelerator on membership. So we fully expect that there's going to be a downturn. And when there's a downturn, you don't expect to have to pick back up on the membership side. So that waiting list is critical to be engaged with that waiting list and make it active and provide them access to that. We've got a lot of questions on capacity. And, we think the capacity issue, again, we're recommending to clients just to take a breath and let's see what happens here in the next 6 to 12 months, because we don't think clubs are prepared to limit the number of members coming in because of future costs. We've talked about the inflationary pressures that are on the club, and as a matter of fact, we actually think that adding members in many instances, as we're able to build additional facilities, will happen many times in order to pay for those. But we would say be very, very careful. There's nothing more fundamental than membership and having a great future members that are lined up to come into the door. Don't push them and give them to somebody else.
And I'll
Great
add to
answer.
that. I'll add to that with the observation that members are the backbone of your club. It's essential from an existential standpoint. You have to have members. I said this earlier today. I believe that the sun does not shine on the same dog's back every day. And the fact is, our market is changing, it's shifting, and there may become a day when you need those members. So don't push them away. Find a way to embrace them. Find a way to make your club and its lifestyle proposition relevant to them while they're waiting. Include them in activities. Let them start to develop a network of friends. And if you do, you will retain them until such time that you're able to admit them as full members or whatever level of membership they choose to make themselves. So don't lose them, keep them.
I think that's, they're both incredibly good answers. I have a lot of membership directors on this call and others in the industry. I would ask the two of you, having the experience and and years in clubs, what role should membership and communication professionals take in educating and engaging these questions to club leadership? How should they go about setting themselves up to be one of the most valuable positions within their club?
Yeah. Can you guys still hear me? I say I froze on the screen. Can
Yes.
you hear me?
Uh-huh.
Let me
We can
take
hear.
that, Henry, there. I think the value, I get this question. I did a PCMA conference in Naples not too long ago, and this came from the audience, a question like this. And I think now's the time. You got to dive in. You got to know the data. You got to value add to the club, and you have an opportunity. The club business, we collect all the data, but there aren't very many clubs in our industry that are great at using that data and increasing the member value. You want to be invaluable to your club. Keep that attrition rate low and create member value, and that'll do your career well. Expand your skill, get into some of the operations, and help people create more value.
And Jim, I really love that answer. I strongly support you on that. I'll add for those membership directors and communications professionals that are on this call on support. There's no rule against getting others to come and help you deliver your message. I can tell you with certainty, I know Jim well enough, I know Rick well enough. If you called any of us and said, could you come to my club and help me deliver this message to my board, we would be there. And so it for us, and we're just three. There are many other consultants that are active in the private club segment. Call on support. Keep in mind that if the messenger needs to get shot, it's better that it's not you, and it's better than it's me or Jim or Rick or someone else. So let us bring to bear the value of our white hair or no hair, and provide you the kind of support that you deserve, and that will help you to make a winning argument in your boardroom.
What a great offer, Henry. Thank you very much. And on behalf of PCMA, again, let me express my absolute pleasure at having had several occasions to talk to the two of you. And even though I've probably the oldest on this call, and having probably been at it a little bit longer, I tend to learn something every time I have a conversation with either one of you, and in this case, both. Thank you so much for sharing. To our audience, thank you for being here today. To everyone, have a warm and blessed holiday season, and may we all see immense improvements to our personal lives, to our clubs, and to our world in 2023. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Amen.
Goodbye. Goodbye, all.
Bye.